Kopf. Wahrscheinlich vergesse ich die Hälfte wie immer, aber das ist ja nicht so. Ich mache mir mal Gedanken, was ich sagen will, und dann versuche ich das.
Benjamin hat mich rekrutiert, ich weiß überhaupt nicht, was ich sagen will.
Wenn ich ablese, bin ich einfach zu schlecht.
Nee, von an wird immer besser, ne?
Ja, oh, jetzt geht's. Jawohl, ja, alles klar. Ich bin zu hören, glaube ich jedenfalls. Super, alles klar. Alles Paletti.
Batterien okay sind. Alles klar, alles danke. Also Sie haben es abgezogen, ne? Aber ja, alles gut. Das kriegen wir gleich.
Wenn ich gleich oben bin.
Begrüßen, kurz darauf hinweisen, in diesem Theater gelten natürlich die bekannten Corona-Regeln. Insofern können Sie am Platz die Masken aussetzen. Wenn Sie dann im Haus rumlaufen, bitten wir Sie, die Masken aufzusetzen. Ansonsten ist hier eine Anlage drin, die filtert, und die Leute, die hier zu Gast gekommen sind, beherzigen die 3G-Regeln. Insofern, das haben wir auch überprüft, insofern haben wir, glaube ich, alles dafür getan, dass das eine sichere Veranstaltung wird. Wir begrüßen Sie ganz herzlich und Sie werden sich fragen, warum diese Veranstaltung? In aller Kürze, wir haben im letzten Jahr hier eine Veranstaltung gehabt zum Thema "Vom unterm Strich zähle ich zum neuen Wir". haben wir mit Journalisten und mit Wissenschaftlern darüber diskutiert, wieso löst sich eigentlich so vieles auf, warum wird es immer individualistischer, und haben gleichzeitig auch Ansätze diskutiert, wo mehr Solidarität entsteht, und haben im Sinne eines solidarischen Individualismus versucht, diese Extreme zusammenzuführen. Jemand, der sich damit intensiv beschäftigt hat, ist Sandel. Und im Nachgang der Veranstaltung, letztes Jahr haben wir dann gesagt, wie wäre es denn eigentlich, Sandel hier zu uns zu holen? Und ich bin sehr froh und dankbar, dass 2 Partner gesagt haben, das finden wir spannend, da machen wir mit. Die möchte ich ganz herzlich vorstellen. Zum einen ist es das Wissenschaftsforum zu Köln und Essen, an der Spitze der Chef Professor Hinsch. Herzlich willkommen. Professor Hinsch wird gleich auch auf dem Podium mitdiskutieren, ist am Philosophischen Seminar der Universität zu Köln, ist in Hamburg geboren und hat vor allen Dingen sich sehr viel mit Gerechtigkeitsfragen und mit der Frage der liberalen Gesellschaft beschäftigt. Und was am Wissenschaftsforum so spannend ist, wenn Sie es noch nicht kennen, gucken Sie sich das an. Das ist die Idee, dass man Wissenschaft und Politik, Wissenschaft und Öffentlichkeit wieder zusammenbringt. Das ist der Ansatz des Wissenschaftsforums und insofern ist die heutige Veranstaltung da, glaube ich, ein ganz wichtiger Schritt. Den zweiten Partner, den ich vorstellen möchte, ist Dr. Benjamin Becker, ist der Leiter des Amerika-Hauses in Köln. Das Amerika-Haus in Köln ist ja im Grunde genommen zuständig in dieser Stadt und weit darüber hinaus für das transatlantische Verhältnis, wie es immer so schön heißt, seit vielen Jahren mit spannenden Veranstaltungen, die dazu beitragen, dass die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika und Deutschland zusammenbleiben, bei allen Unterschieden trotzdem immer im Gespräch bleiben. Insofern hat sich das Amerika-Haus sofort bereit erklärt, mit einzusteigen in diese Diskussion. Insofern sind wir dieses Jahr 3 Veranstalter. Mein Name ist Jochen Ott, ich bin Landtagsabgeordneter in Köln. Wir möchten uns aber bedanken bei dem 4. Partner, ohne den das nicht ging. Und der hat, man glaubt es kaum, wie letztes Jahr am 3.10. heute Geburtstag. Ist nämlich nicht nur Tag der deutschen Einheit, sondern es ist auch der Geburtstag von Axel Molinski, dem Chef quasi hier von der Volksbühne. Also lieber Axel, herzlichen Glückwunsch zu deinem Geburtstag und schön, dass wir hier sein können.
Ein herzliches guten Abend. Ich freue mich, dass Sie gekommen sind, auch dass so viele gekommen sind. Ob es beim Wissenschaftsforum direkt einen Chef gibt, weiß ich gar nicht, aber ich bin jedenfalls der Sprecher des Wissenschaftsforums und auch der Initiator in einem gewissen Sinne. Und in der Tat, es geht darum, wie Jochen Ott gesagt hat, Philosophie und Politik, öffentliche Moral, öffentliche Ethik und politische Meinungsbildung enger zusammenzubringen. Und das erklärt auch gleich, warum ich die Anfrage per SMS, ob ich nicht mitmachen wolle, von Jochen Ott, sehr gerne angenommen habe. Dies ist im Grunde die Art von Ereignis, das wir uns als Bürgerinnenveranstaltung vorstellen im Wissenschaftsforum. Eine Besonderheit des Wissenschaftsforums liegt darin, dass wir im Grunde es gibt all diese Slogans, Public Understanding of Science, Wissenschaftskommunikation, und dem geben wir doch nochmal eine besondere Wendung. Insofern unser Ziel nicht ist, uns direkt an die ganz breite politische Öffentlichkeit zu wenden, sondern wir gehen davon aus oder wir glauben, dass die Wissenschaftsfeindlichkeit, mit der wir so viele Probleme im Moment weltweit haben, nicht vor den Toren der Universität beginnt, sondern in den Universitäten. Nicht zwischen den Fakultäten, Disziplinen gibt es genauso viel Fremdheit, Bestreitung des wissenschaftlichen Status der anderen Kolleginnen und Kollegen wie außerhalb der Öffentlichkeit. Und deshalb glauben wir im Wissenschaftsforum, dass es sehr wichtig ist, den im engeren Sinne akademischen Diskurs auch noch einmal ganz anders in Bewegung zu bringen, unter Einbeziehung von Bürgerinnen und Bürgern, Entscheidungsträgern aus Politik und Wirtschaft und anderen Personen. Und auch in der Lehre, also bei den Studierenden, die ja letztlich die zukünftigen Multiplikatoren und auch die zukünftigen Entscheidungsträgerinnen sein werden, auch bei denen bereits diese Art von Diskurs zu initiieren, in dem öffentlich relevante Fragen in einer wissenschaftlich anspruchsvollen Weise behandelt werden können, was nicht notwendigerweise bedeutet, dass es unverständlich wird. Nicht viele Dinge lassen sich viel besser kommunizieren, als man sich das so vorstellt, vielleicht auf den ersten Blick. Und es ist zum Teil auch eine Trägheit der Wissenschaft, an der Stelle nicht genügend bisher getan zu haben. Also das ist die Grundidee eigentlich. Ich darf Ihnen kurz Sandel vorstellen. Nicht dazu, das muss ich mir nochmal an. Und wenn ich das jetzt so ganz akademisch förmlich machen würde, würde ich sagen, er lehrt politische Philosophie im Government Department der Harvard-Universität und hat zahlreiche Bücher zu den für uns hier interessanten Themen veröffentlicht. Das trifft aber nur im Grunde einen ganz beschränkten Ausschnitt. In Wirklichkeit ist er so etwas wie eine globale Größe, jemand, der Philosophie weltweit lehrt. Und zwar lehrt nicht nur in diesem akademisch-förmlichen Sinne, dass es eingeschriebene Studierenden gibt, die ein bestimmtes Pensum absolvieren, sondern lehrt im alten sokratischen Sinne. Das heißt, er verwickelt weltweit Menschen aus allen möglichen Lebensbereichen in fundamentale philosophische Diskussionen, die an vielen Stellen sehr viel Aufsehen erregen, aber auch Veränderung bewirken. Das ist der Gesichtspunkt des Public Understandings und des wissenschaftlichen Engagements von Philosophen, also Kolleginnen und Kollegen von mir auch, doch ganz vorbildlich, und er macht das in ganz ungewöhnlich erfolgreicher Weise. Heute Abend sind wir jetzt eine kleine Gruppe, daran sehe ich aber gar keinen Nachteil, aber in China möchte ich doch kurz darauf hinweisen, obwohl Sie es auch auf jeder Webseite finden können, nicht? Hat er zum Teil Publikumsgrößen gehabt, die an Fußballspiele erinnern, nicht? In Seoul, in einem offenen Stadion mit Zehntausenden, aber auch in Beijing oder Xiamen University. Im Süden Chinas gibt es große Zuschauergruppen und Studierende und Nichtstudierende, die lebhaft miteinander in einen Austausch geraten. Nun ist aber Wahrheit, philosophische Einsicht, das Gute, das Richtige sind ja alles keine Fragen von Demografie und Stimmenziel. Und insofern ist unser kleinerer Kreis ja gar nicht so unwillkommen, weil er natürlich eine andere Möglichkeit zum intensiven sachlichen Austausch bietet, und würde mich sehr freuen, wir alle würden uns sehr freuen, wenn Sie das an der Stelle auch einsteigen würden. Ich nenne noch mal kurz ein paar Bücher, die Sie draußen auch auf dem Büchertisch finden. Es beginnt mit Liberalism and the Limits of Justice 1982. Das Buch, was ich auch als erstes von ihm gelesen habe, was noch vergleichsweise traditionell akademisch argumentiert, aber doch auch sehr schnell eine breitere Öffentlichkeit gefunden hat. Dann geht es weiter mit Büchern Democracy's Discontent, The Case Against Perfection, eine Auseinandersetzung mit genetischem Ingenieurtum, What Money Doesn't Pay, und dann das berühmte Buch Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do von 2010, das dadurch weltweite Aufmerksamkeit erlangte, dass es auf einer Vorlesung beruht, die Michael Sandel als erster Harvard-Professor, wenn ich das richtig erinnere, online gestellt hat, sodass sie weltweit zugänglich war und seitdem Millionen von Zuhörern gefunden hat. Also dieses Buch begründet im Grunde seinen weltweiten Status als Rockstar unter den Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Ja, und heute diskutieren wir im Wesentlichen Themen aus diesem Buch The Tyranny of Merit, das im letzten Jahr erschienen ist und auch schon auf Deutsch zugänglich ist und auch draußen liegt. Dazu brauche ich eigentlich gar nicht weiter etwas zu sagen. Und jetzt übergebe ich aber gerne nochmal an Benjamin, der das Amerika-Haus hier vertritt.
Ja, lieber Jochen, lieber Wilfried, liebe PanelistInnen, dear Professor Sandel, thanks for joining us at this very early time with the time shift. We'll get to that in a minute. Liebe Gäste aller beteiligten Organisationen hier in der Volksbühne, lieber Axel, Happy Birthday, in ganz Deutschland und aus aller Welt. Fragestellungen, die beide Nationen betreffen, Deutschland und die USA, vor allem gesellschaftspolitische, gesellschaftskulturelle Fragestellungen, die interessieren uns brennend beim Amerika-Haus Nordrhein-Westfalen, also genau jene Fragestellungen, die Michael Sandel in seinem Buch The Tyranny of Merit oder auch vom Ende des Gemeinwohls aufwirft und die wir heute mit Ihnen diskutieren werden. Ganz besonders freut es mich, dass neben den Präsenzpartnern hier vor Ort auch der gesamte Verbund der deutsch-amerikanischen Zentren, also die Amerika-Haus-Nachfolgeorganisationen, als Online-Partner dabei ist, im Rahmen unserer gemeinsamen Reihe, das ist so eine zweite Reihe, die so mitschwingt, die Zukunft des transatlantischen Traums. Das T ist so in Klammern, also so Traum und Raum, kleines Wortspiel. Herzliche Grüße also dort draußen an die KollegInnen aus Freiburg, Hamburg, Heidelberg, Kaiserslautern, Kiel, Leipzig, München, Nürnberg, Saarbrücken, Stuttgart und Tübingen. Außerordentlich dankbar bin ich unserem Vorstandsmitglied Dr. Juliane Kronen, die heute auf dem Podium eine deutsch-amerikanische Perspektive einnehmen wird. Frau Dr. Krohn ist es gewohnt, verschiedene Hüte aufzuhaben, unter anderem, ich sage das unter anderem, weil es viel ist, als Gründerin und Geschäftsführerin des Kölner Sozialunternehmens in Natura, als Honorarkonsulin des Königreichs Schwedens in Nordrhein-Westfalen, als ehemalige Partnerin der Boston Consulting Group und als Alumna des deutsch-amerikanischen Fulbright-Programms. Heute bündelt sie diese geballte Expertise und blickt speziell auf die deutsch-amerikanischen Beziehungen, worauf ich mich sehr mit Ihnen freue. Herzlich willkommen, liebe Juliane.
Danke für die Einladung.
Nun noch zu einem kleinen Highlight, das den Gästen hier im Publikum Präsenz vorbehalten ist. Wir bieten vor Ort eine Simultanübersetzung vom Englischen ins Deutsche an. Hierfür haben Sie draußen Headsets gefunden. Sie können sich auch noch ein Headset holen. Jetzt höre ich Sie schon sagen, aber ich kann doch Englisch. Das glaube ich Ihnen sogar, aber Sie geben sich überhaupt keine Blöße, wenn Sie das Headset ab und zu aufsetzen, denn dann hören Sie vielleicht die deutschen Stimmen von Präsident Obama und allen möglichen anderen Präsidenten. A real treat. Nämlich die Stimmen Frank Dea und Franz Kubacik. Die sitzen da oben in der Übersetzerkabine, diejenigen im Publikum. Herzlich willkommen, vielen Dank. Und apropos Englisch, wenn Sie gleich Fragen stellen wollen, ich bin mir sicher, Sie wollen das und sagen, das möchte ich aber lieber auf Deutsch machen, ich traue mich das nicht auf Englisch oder ich möchte es nicht auf Englisch. Martina Butler, unsere Moderatorin, die übersetzt gerne für Sie, auch dafür herzlichen Dank. Last but by no means least, vielen, vielen Dank an all die Helping Hands, wie man im Englischen sagt, aller beteiligter Organisationen. Ich zähle sie nicht alle auf, denn es sind viele. Also einfach im Geiste mitgedacht, in allen Funktionen, durchführend und vorbereitend und nachbereitend. Vielen, vielen Dank.
So.
Genau.
I'm Michael Sandel. We're very pleased that you are here. Thank you very much. Ihr könnt das noch nicht sehen, aber wir können ihn schon sehen in den Monitoren da oben. Zum Schluss bleiben noch zwei Menschen vorzustellen. Zum einen freuen wir uns sehr darüber, dass der Vorsitzende der Ebert-Stiftung, der langjährige Präsident des Europäischen Parlaments, mein Freund Martin Schulz, heute hier ist. Herzlich willkommen, lieber Martin. Ja, und ist schon erwähnt worden, aber auch nochmal mit einem dicken Dankeschön versehen, Martina Butler, die für den Westdeutschen Rundfunk in den Vereinigten Staaten ja auch über die Präsidentschaftswahlen berichtet hat, die profunde Kennerin ist und die gesagt hat, das ist so spannend, da mache ich mit. Frau Butler, vielen herzlichen Dank, schön, dass Sie heute moderieren. Dass das alles hier möglich ist, mit Kabinen, mit Technik, überall, also alles so Sachen, die mich wirklich faszinieren. Das ist möglich, weil Florian Ewert von Creative Lighting und sein Team seit heute Morgen 6 Uhr hier alles aufgebaut haben. Vielen herzlichen Dank dafür. So, und für alle, die jetzt über die Republik und darüber hinaus uns zuhören, ihr könnt über YouTube auch Fragen stellen. Diese Fragen werden oben in der Technik gesammelt und laufen hier vorne auf dem Bildschirm bei Frau Butler ein und werden dann auch mit in das Plenum eingenommen, damit wir hier darüber diskutieren können. Also sowohl hier im Raum, aber dann auch an den Geräten könnt ihr euch gerne beteiligen. Ich freue mich wahnsinnig, dass wir jetzt loslegen können. Ich wünsche uns allen eine spannende Veranstaltung. Danke dem Partner nochmal und Frau Butler, Sie legen einfach los. Viel Spaß zusammen.
Well, from here on it's English. Thank you, Mr. Ott, Mr. Becker, and Mr. Hinch for your kind introduction. And good morning to Professor Sandel. So far, not everyone can see you on stage, but you're part of this panel already. And I know that you personally know a few of the panelists up here. And to give you an idea of the setting where we are in an amazing theater in Köln. It's called Volksbühne. And it's really something where you in the US would say this is really an old school theater. And it's more than 100 people who made it here this morning for this discussion and to hear you talk about your latest book, The Tyranny of Merit, and the ideas that you put forward there. But also, as just mentioned, there are more people out there in the world who are following the whole event on YouTube. And we're going to start out with a presentation that you give about the tyranny of merit and the ideas that you put forward there about where we stand as societies and where we're heading to. And and after that, we'll go on with questions to the panel, but also, of course, with questions from the audience here and online. So without further ado, I hope you had a strong coffee already this morning at 6 a.m. your time. Our attention is all yours.
Well, thank you very much for welcoming me in Cologne. It's been some years since I last visited Cologne, and I look forward to the time when I can be with you there in person again. But I'm deeply honored to be joined by this very distinguished panel for a discussion of meritocracy and contemporary politics and society. I have one confession to make, which is I did not have to wake up quite as early as you suggested with a strong coffee, because I am actually on sabbatical spending some months in Spain. So I'm in the same time.
Okay, well done. We hope that the breakfast in Spain was good and lunch is waiting for you later then.
Thank you.
What we would like to do is just give the floor to you.
Well, thank you very much. I should say that I wrote the book, The Tyranny of Merit, trying to make sense of two political developments. One of those developments consisted of the shocking events of 2016, the vote for Brexit in Britain and the election of Trump in the United States. What these two events had in common is that both represented backlash against elites, well-credentialed elites, professional elites, governing elites. I wanted to understand what was the source of this anger and resentment. Secondly, I wanted to understand why it was the case that the primary victims politically of the backlash, the populist backlash against elites, were parties of the center left, the Democratic Party in the United States, the Labour Party in Britain, social democratic parties in Europe. Why is it that in recent decades, these parties, which once were parties of working people, representing working people against the powerful and the privileged, had lost, even alienated, the support of many working people? Why was that? How did it happen? And how did center-left parties become identified more with the professional classes, with well-credentialed, well-educated elites, than with the working class voters who once constituted their base? So these were the two motivations to write The Tyranny of Merit. And here's my account. We'll see what you think. In recent decades, the divide between winners and losers has been deepening, poisoning our politics, pulling us apart. This has partly to do with the widening inequalities of recent decades, but it's not only that. I think it also has to do with changing attitudes towards success that have accompanied the rising inequalities. Those who've landed on top have come to believe that their success is their own doing and that they therefore deserve the full measure of rewards that the market showers upon them. And by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, must deserve their fate too. This way of thinking about success arises, paradoxically, from a seemingly attractive ideal, the principle of meritocracy. The principle of meritocracy says that if chances are equal, the winners deserve their winnings. There are two things wrong, it seems to me, with the meritocratic ideal. The first is we don't live up to it. The second is the ideal itself is flawed. First, about the word of our failure to live up to the meritocratic principles we profess. We see this in higher education. Let me give an American example. In the Ivy League universities of the United States, despite generous policies of financial aid, so that anyone who is admitted and can't afford to come is fully provided for, despite these generous policies, there are more students attending Ivy League universities from families in the top 1% than there are students from families in the bottom half of the country combined. Here's another measure. Someone did a survey of the 100 most competitive colleges and universities in the United States. 70% of the students who attended these colleges and universities came from the top 25% of the income scale. You know how many came from the bottom 25%, from poor families? Only 3%. My impression is that the situation is somewhat similar in Germany. I've read that only 15% of students from families where nobody has completed a university, only 15% of students come from such families, whereas 63% of students from well-educated households are able to complete a bachelor's degree. So we don't live up to the meritocratic principle we profess, but there's a further problem with meritocracy, and that is the ideal itself is flawed. Even if we could manage to create a perfect meritocracy, where chances were truly equal to rise, still, a perfectly meritocratic society would not be a just society, nor would it be a good society, for the following reason. Meritocracy has a dark side. The dark side is that it is corrosive of solidarity. It's corrosive of the common good. Even a perfectly functioning meritocracy leads to hubris among the winners and to humiliation for those who lose out. This is because it encourages the successful to believe that their success is their own doing, they've earned it, especially insofar as chances are equal. This leads them to forget the luck and good fortune that helped them on their way. It leads them to forget their indebtedness to those who made their achievements possible: family, teachers, community, country, the times in which we live. It also leads the successful, believing that they have earned their place, to look down on those less fortunate than themselves. And this leads us to our current political moment. One of the most potent sources of the populist backlash against elites is the sense among many working people that elites look down on them. And it's a legitimate complaint. Because even as globalization brought deepening inequality and stagnant wages, its proponents offered working people some bracing advice. If you want to compete and win in the global economy, go to university. What you earn will depend on what you learn. You can make it if you try. These are the slogans we heard time and again from politicians across the political spectrum, but especially from politicians of the center left. I call it the rhetoric of rising. The response of political parties, including parties of the center left, to the rising inequality brought about by globalization and new technology, the response was not to address that inequality directly, but instead to offer individual upward mobility through higher education. What these elites failed to realize was the insult implicit in this advice. Because if you didn't get a university degree, and if you're struggling in the new economy, the message was, your failure is your fault. Now, part of the way in which we fall short of a perfect meritocratic society is that it isn't easy to rise. Mobility in many advanced democracies is not what the political slogan presumes it to be. It's true, there are strong patterns of upward mobility between generations in a handful of countries, mainly Nordic countries. In Denmark, for example, the number of generations it takes for low-income families to rise to the average income, in Denmark, it takes 2 generations. In Finland, Norway, and Sweden, it takes 3. In the United States and Britain, it takes 5 generations. And in Germany, it takes 6. This suggests that responding to inequality and wage stagnation simply by offering the promise of individual upward mobility through higher education misses the fact that it isn't easy to rise in our societies. So it's no wonder that many working people turned against meritocratic, credentialed elites. What should we do? I think we need to reconsider 3 aspects of our civic life: the role of higher education, the dignity of work, and the meaning of success. We should begin by rethinking the role of universities as arbiters of opportunity. Those of us who spend our days in the company of the credentialed can easily forget a simple fact. Most of our fellow citizens do not have a university degree. In the United States, nearly 2/3 do not. And the figure is roughly similar in most European countries. So it's folly to create an economy that sets as a necessary condition of dignified work and a decent life a university degree that most people don't have. So it seems to me that we should shift the focus of political discourse. We should focus less on arming people for a meritocratic race and focus more on the dignity of work, focus more on respect for everyone who contributes to the common good, focus more on making life better for those who may lack a university diploma, but who nonetheless make important contributions to the common good through the work they do, the families they raise, and the communities they serve. This means putting the dignity of work rather than meritocratic competition at the center of our politics. We need to remember that work is not only about making a living, it's also about contributing to the common good and winning social recognition and esteem and honor and respect for doing so. Shortly before he was assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. captured something important about the dignity of work. He traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, to address a group of striking sanitation workers, garbage collectors. What he told them was this: the person who picks up our garbage is, in the final analysis, as significant as the physician. Because if he doesn't do his job, diseases are rampant. And then he added, all labor has dignity. We've had a lesson in what counts as a valuable contribution from the experience of this pandemic. The pandemic highlighted inequalities that existed before the pandemic. But by highlighting them, it made unavoidable a certain fact about our social and economic life. Those of us who had the luxury during the pandemic of working from home couldn't help but notice how deeply we depend on workers we often overlook. Not only those workers in the hospital caring for COVID patients, I'm thinking also of delivery workers, warehouse workers, grocery store clerks, truck drivers, home healthcare providers, childcare workers. These are not the best paid or most honored workers in our societies. And yet now, during the pandemic, we began calling them essential workers or key workers. This could be a moment for a broader public debate about how to bring their pay and recognition into better alignment with the importance of the work they do. Finally, we should reconsider the meaning of success. We should question those of us who have enjoyed some measure of success. We should question our meritocratic hubris. Do I really deserve the talents that enable me to flourish? Is it my doing that I live in a society that happens to prize and to reward the talents I have in abundance? Is that my doing, or is that my good luck? Insisting that my success is my due makes it hard to see myself in other people's shoes. Appreciating the role of luck in life, on the other hand, can prompt a certain humility. There, but for the accident of birth, or the mystery of fate, or the grace of God, go I. This spirit of humility is a civic virtue we need now. It's the beginning of the way back from the harsh ethic of success that drives us apart. This humility could be the beginning of a turn away from the rancor of the tyranny of merit toward a more generous public life that creates more space, more possibilities for a politics of the common good. Thank you very much. And now I look forward to hear what my colleagues on the panel have to say about all of this.
Thank you so much, Professor Sandel, for taking us along your thought process and your analysis. I would first like to bring the panel into the debate and start with a fellow colleague of yours from Cologne, Professor Hinch, and see if you come to the same conclusions or if you differ in certain points.
Yeah, thank you so much for your brilliant short lecture. The last time actually I saw you lecturing was in Boylston at Harvard, where a lecture which I attended with John Rawls together, just after the appearance of your book, Liberalism and the Limits of Justice. I'm grateful to be here and to have another chance to get into an exchange. And since I'm the one to begin this exchange. I shall try to be brief and not too philosophically, actually. But I should like to start with a confession also. I greatly admire your work, actually, as a public philosopher. I mean, it combines in a stunning way philosophical erudition, analytic sharpness, and clarity, and with a sense of social reality and politics, which is not easy to achieve. So, very good. And as it happens, as a philosopher, I'm also in broad agreement with your philosophical engagement with meritocracy, both as a somewhat aloof ideal of political ethics and as a social phenomenon. Don't blink. Academic elitism and anti-democratic populism are social challenges that must be addressed urgently as a matter of practical politics, but also as a matter of scientific inquiry and philosophical reflection. So we are in full agreement about this. Now, this being said, I briefly remind the audience, you already know this, that in philosophy we honor our heroes not by adulation, but by criticizing them and their main claims. And that's what I shall try to do. And perhaps ironically, my critical stance comes from a rather unphilosophical consideration. So perhaps that's my idea. The way you attack the problem of right-wing populism and to be fully convincing, at least to me. You know, as a philosophical idea, I take it that meritocracy is basically a truism of public ethics, you know? If we take meritocracy to mean that social positions and offices should go to those who are able to perform and who are motivated to do good in these positions, it's hard to deny that this is a reasonable idea, even if it combines with the further idea that differential rewards, I mean higher income and more privileges, should go to those in higher valued social positions. And I take it that every modern society is a socially differentiated society, which some kind of higher and lower position strata. So it's hard to take issue with that. And at some points it seems as if you were doing this. Let me quote one sentence from your book, which I took on this piece of paper here. Equality of opportunity, which of course is a necessary correlate of meritocracy. Equality of opportunity is morally necessary corrective to injustice, but only as a corrective to injustice. But it is a remedial principle, not an adequate idea for a good society. And I do not believe in this statement, and it's not fully clear to me that you actually mean it the way it reads. You know, if we have the meritocratic idea, we need to have also equality of opportunity in order to select actually the most able and best, most suitably motivated people and not others for family relations or whatever. So we need this, and if we have a socially differentiated society, we have inequality, and I guess you don't want to say that every inequality is unjust by itself. So, and if you have a socially stratified society with this idea of positions should go to the most able and suitably motivated people, you need to have equality of opportunity as an integral part of a sufficiently complete or comprehensive understanding of social justice. So, and as it goes, meritocracy implies in a way or involves equality of opportunity, but inversely, it's not true that equal opportunity presupposes meritocracy, right? Even if positions were not allocated by some idea of merit or desert, we would need equality of opportunity for a just society. And from your correct argument that equality of opportunity is not everything, it certainly does not follow that it's just a remedial principle to correct injustice. And let me again quote to finish my comment. You cite from your book, you cite Catherine Kramer's work on these rural communities in Wisconsin who were studying popular resentments against academic elitism. And then you say, quote, that residents of rural communities believed that too much tax money and government attention went to undeserving people. And that's the idea motivating the fight against positive affirmative action and positive discrimination programs. So actually, this kind of resentment already presupposes some idea of a meritocratic kind. So to actually focus in your criticism on the idea of meritocracy doesn't do justice actually to this kind of resentment. So, but I fully agree with the idea that academic elitism is a bad thing and that we have to do something about it. But that's more about what kind of merit counts. That's the question you discuss when you talk about remedial strategies to deal with popular resentments and anti-democratic populism. So, yeah, that's I guess, for the beginning enough.
Right.
Thanks for your attention.
And we'll give you a
Thank you
chance
for that.
before we move on into the political field with Martin Schulz to react to this, because I see a lot of writing that's happening in Spain right now.
Yes. Well, thank you, Professor Hinch, for that very generous, but also challenging response to the book and to my argument.
Abgedruckt, danke. Vielen Dank.
I think it's important to distinguish merit understood simply as competence to perform a social role well from the meritocratic principle, which is about deservingness. So merit, simply understood as competence, is a good thing and an uncontroversial thing, as you suggest. If I need surgery, I want a well-qualified surgeon to perform it. But as you rightly point out, Professor Hinch, meritocracy is not only the idea that life will be better if positions are allocated to those who are competent to perform them, who have merit in that sense. Meritocracy involves that there be differential rewards and that those differential rewards reflect the moral deservingness of those who receive them. That's the further claim of meritocracy. And it's that further claim that I reject. I don't reject the possibility that to reward people with competence, or to provide, I should say, incentives to people with competence, there can be differential rewards. But I think it's a mistake to assume that the differential rewards assigned by a market economy, by the labor market, which is the way we typically provide and determine the differential rewards for different social roles. I think it's a mistake to assume that the labor market wage differentials correspond to anything we would call moral desert or deservingness for the following reason. First, to take a practical example, then the reason of principle. The practical example is, if we really believed that the labor market, the differential rewards provided by the labor market corresponded to moral deservingness or to the true social value of people's contribution to the economy and the common good, then we would have to conclude that the social contribution of a hedge fund manager or an investment bank CEO is 900 or 1,000 times greater than the value of the social contribution of a nurse or a school teacher. But even the most enthusiastic defenders of free markets would be hard put to make that claim, that the social value contributed by an investment banker is 900 times greater than the social value or contribution of a school teacher or a nurse. So we are capable of deciding, of deliberating, of arguing, of debating whose social contributions matter most without accepting the verdict of the market, which incorporates all sorts of contingencies that are morally unrelated to deservingness. Take an example from the world of sports. Take a great athlete, great football player, Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, who recently signed with a new team. They make tens of millions of dollars. And yes, they work hard. Yes, they are great football players. They are more than competent. Yes, we accept that they receive differential rewards. But can we really say that they morally deserve the enormous pay that they receive? Well, you might say it depends whether everyone has an equal opportunity to become a great football player. Well, let's suppose everyone did. Now, I could practice football 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for my entire life, and I would never be as good a football player as Lionel Messi or Ronaldo. That's because they have, in addition to their effort and training, great athletic talents and gifts, which are no doing of theirs. Not only that, so that's a matter of luck. That's not a matter of deservingness, that they be as gifted as they are. Not only that, the fact that Lionel Messi and Ronaldo live at a time that rewards football, that too is not their doing. That's their good luck. If Messi had lived back in the days of the Renaissance, they didn't care much about football then. They cared more about fresco painters. So there are two elements of luck that undermine the idea that the successful, whether athletes or hedge fund managers or professors, morally deserve the benefits that the market bestows on those who have this or that talent. Which brings me, to Professor Hinch's point about equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity, what would that mean? It would mean giving everyone a chance to practice football, everyone access to the best coaches and to good nutrition and to the proper equipment. But even if opportunity to become a great football player were equal in that sense, we know that Messi and Ronaldo would still achieve the greatest success in football. And so this is why it's one thing to affirm equality of opportunity for the sake of matching people with social roles. It's another thing to remove barriers to achievement based on prejudice or nepotism or coming from a poor family. All of this is important. But the reason it doesn't add up to a just society or to a good society is that if it becomes the basis for meritocratic deservingness, then it leads the successful and the society to forget the role of luck and to mistakenly assume that the rewards the market bestows on the successful somehow reflects what they morally deserve. That's the meritocratic claim, and that's the claim I reject.
And with soccer, no better starting point than to introduce Martin Schulz to you, who probably hoped to be a Messi some years ago. And I've seen a lot of nodding going on here right next to me while you were giving your introductory remarks. And I would like to know, because we are talking a lot in the last year and a half about we're in this together. Are we?
No, for sure not. I'm following the more academic debate, and I beg your pardon already in advance that I, as a politician, tried to put the attention more on what I faced, for example, as a serving member of a parliament during the last 3 decades, perceiving directly. I was, for example, the president of the European Parliament and facing the Brexit debate in the European Parliament, in the United Kingdom, in the member states of the European Union, and in Brussels directly confronted with Nigel Farage every day. He was a group chairman, and I had to treat this man with the unjustified respect I had to spend to this man from a formal point of view. So I beg your pardon if I try to put the attention more to concrete experience, sharing the overwhelming majority of your arguments and your proposals. First of all, for us as social democrats, as socialists in Europe and in the United States, the Democrats you mentioned, that especially during the last, let's say, 3 decades, the Democrats in the United States and the Social Democrats in Europe were the parties suffering most. And therefore is the first question, what was our own contribution to the development? And our own contribution was in the 90th of the last century, that Blair and Schröder, for example, with their common paper they published in 1998, accepted this presumption of end of history and that capitalism won at the end the race, and it is not about the system. The system is clear. It is the capitalist system. There is no other way, even not a third way, as it was discussed in the 70th and 80th by socialists in Europe, especially the Swedish way. No, it is quite clear capitalism is a superior system, and it's not about the system. It's about how to distribute in a justified, just and fair way the efforts of the system. That was the first big mistake in my eyes, to abolish the question, is there an alternative to this outraged capitalism? And because that was given up, we had in the next decade a situation that in Europe especially, but also in the United States of America, Bill Clinton, people working hard and playing by the rules. You quote this also in some of your texts. Transformed the public debate in Europe in a debate giving up the welfare system the European member states, especially my country, the Federal Republic of Germany, was used to stick to. And now there is a key message you gave, and in the years between 2000 and 2010, I faced it in Europe and especially in Germany, the dark side of meritocracy, you called it. The dark side is, and this was a feeling later then by a lot of people, your problems are your failure is your fault. This is what you said. And I faced this here in Germany. My experience as a leading member of the Social Democratic Party in Germany, fighting against that thinking, but being in the minority in my party, I saw it in the following way. In 2002, 2003, Federal Republic of Germany was in a deep economic crisis with around 5 million unemployed workers. And we had a Minister of Economy, Social Democratic, former Prime Minister of North Rhine-Westphalia, who said, I quote, and I translate it in English, I hope it is the correct translation, in such a deep crisis, the Federal Republic of Germany can no longer allow itself, permit itself such a welfare state. Mit 5 Millionen Arbeitslosen können wir uns einen solchen Wohlfahrtsstaat nicht mehr leisten in Germany. This is was first of all wrong, but secondly, the message was to transform people who relied in a crisis system, to the system of the welfare state, to transform them not in victims who should get a justified support. They were transformed in people who demanded in an unjustified way something from the state. But the transforming of victims into perpetrators. That was the message, in my eyes, dramatic message of that time. And the psychological effect was, you quoted, I quote you, elites look down to me. There is a Minister of Economy calling himself a social democrat with a high salary, he himself with a nice life, nice environment for himself, telling me, after 40 years of work, with 58 years becoming unemployed, your demand is not justified. This is, in my eyes, not only, that happened not only in Germany, it happened in a lot of member states of the European Union and also in the United States of America, that people were told by the so-called elites that what uncontested during the 50th, 60th, 70th, 80th were a guarantee they deserved in the society in which they lived was given up and was changed into an unjustified request. That means the next step, if I belong to these 5 million, it's not only socially a disaster for me, it's also that other people who are not in my shoes tell me it's your own failure. You should look that you belong to the other side, should not become unemployed. So there are for me, some explanations, some mistakes we as Social Democrats made, but I could continue with a lot of other examples. The question I raised now to us is, what is our task now as a chairman of a think tank? I understand easily, and your book contributed a lot for me to understand even better what happened. But what's now our task for the next future, what are the next steps? And therefore, I want to raise 2 points, which are, in my eyes, the most important ones, to overcome the gap which is existing now. And the gap is not only a social one, it is more and more a cultural gap. What we are seeing in the United States is a gap of, I call it, forgive me, but it is in the United States. I was not there. I refused to travel to your wonderful country during Trump's rule because, okay, I love the United States. No, I admire the United States of America, but was impossible for me to fly to your country as a politician and then to meet Republicans in Washington, which it's my duty then to meet with a different party, and I didn't want to meet people like Mr. McConnell or other ones. But what I learned, what I heard, what I saw, what I read, what I heard just in preparing our discussion here is worrying me, because I think it is a kind of cold civil war happening in the United States. And it's more and more also a risk, a big danger in Europe. In the United Kingdom, I think it is already existing, in addition in the United Kingdom to the risk of a split of the country. I think the Scottish have a completely different view than the English. And in our country, in Germany and other countries of the European Union, the gap is also existing. The gap, a cultural gap between those people living in the rural areas. You just quoted one of the women saying taxes are not in the justified and right way given to people who deserve it. And this is not an American phenomenon. This is existing here. By the way, exploited by exactly those people like Trump, who are absolutely not belonging to these classes, to these groups of the society, but exploiting their anger by mediatic system, supporting them with this kind of poisoned propaganda, playing one group of the society against another group of the society. And this is in my country, in Germany, in France, very strongly. In Italy, in addition, in Italy, the split between North and South, going in that direction that people in the rural areas feel that happens in the capital of the country, where the cultural, the social, the economic, the mediatic elites are living and working, that the life of the capital has nothing to do, the debate of the capital has nothing to do with their own life in the rural area. And this is even in groups who are economically, socially well comforted, the case that they feel disconnected from what happens in the centers of the countries. And this gap, the gap between Washington and the rest of the country, the gap between New York and the rest of the country, is also, in the meantime, a gap between Paris and the rest of the country, Madrid and the rest of the country, Rome and the rest of Italy, and Berlin and the rest of the Federal Republic of Germany. This cultural gap is, in addition to the social gap this development of the recent years created, is in addition to this, in my eyes, an equal risk to destroy the coherence of our society. So, last observation. Elites look down to them. The question to all of us, because we here in this theater, we on the screens belong to these elites. Let's be honest. We are the elite. And people voting for the right-wing extremists are not here in that room. And we are speaking about them. And the question to us is, what could we contribute to overcome the gap? What is our contribution, our duty to find, to pave a way to get back to dialogue with them? We just said it is impossible. Very difficult. But without the dialogue, we will fail. The precondition to get back dialogue, in my eyes, is to get back the welfare state, to get back the recognition that key workers during the pandemic should not be applauded from the balconies of their houses, but they should be better paid. And we should have an immigration law that people who want to get an access to our aging society, young people, and finding work here, especially in those sectors who have an underdeveloped structure of people working there. These are the key sectors in the hospitals and in the was heißt Altenheim in English? In the
Senior citizen retirement homes.
In the retirement houses. So to get back respect, or to put respect in the center of our activities and our action and our rhetoric, our language, and to make it perceivable that respect is not only a formula, a message, it is practical political experience. There are more people working there, they are better paid, and the society, the elites, we are not only promising, we are delivering, and I'm sure that takes a lot of time. But once it is perceived as a credible step forward, then starts the moment where dialogue re-becomes possible. This is, at the end, the only contribution after the first round I could give. Thank you very much.
Would you like, may I reply? Thank you, Martin Schulz, for those political insights with which, as you know, I have great sympathy. I think one of the most important points you made, and we don't often hear this from social democratic leaders and politicians, is that to analyze the current situation, we have to begin by asking what were our mistakes, as you put it, what was our own contribution to creating this political and cultural divide. And I agree very much that it goes back to the 1990s, to the political and economic project of Bill Clinton in the United States, Tony Blair in Britain, Gerhard Schroeder in Germany, who accepted the basic premise of the Reagan-Thatcher celebration of markets, who, after the end of the Cold War, embraced a kind of market triumphalist faith, the belief that capitalism won, as if capitalism means one thing. And this led, and I think this was another very important point, that instead of questioning the system and the structure of the economy, these politicians said the only question is how to distribute and perhaps redistribute to some degree the results of a finance-driven global capitalist system. And when the system produced widening inequalities of income and wealth, the redistribution didn't happen to any very great extent. To the contrary, as Mr. Schulz points out, the welfare state was reduced during these times by these political figures. But more than that, these political figures and the wider culture added insult to injury by embracing a meritocratic rhetoric of rising. What you earn depends on what you learn. You can make it if you try. If you don't make it, if you don't get a university degree, if you don't better yourself, your failure is your fault. Max Weber once wrote that among the economically successful, the successful want not only to enjoy the benefits of their success, they also want to believe that they deserve it. And they also want to believe that those with less deserve their fate too. In a way, meritocracy answers to this impulse that Max Weber understood. It's no coincidence, I think, that meritocratic attitudes towards success intensified during the very same decades when inequality was increasing. Meritocracy presents itself as an alternative to inequality. It presents itself as a way of bringing everyone up to the same starting point in life. That's the idea of equality of opportunity. But in recent decades, meritocracy has not offered a genuine alternative to inequality. Meritocracy has offered a justification for inequality. And this connects with the final point you made, Mr. Schulz, which is we find ourselves now with deep gaps, which are not only economic and social, but also cultural. And I would say those gaps, you emphasize the gap between rural and urban centers, which is certainly a crucial part of the cultural gap. But it's closely connected with another dimension of the gap, which is between those with and those without a university degree. In voting behavior, in the United States and in Britain and other democracies, the gap between those with and those without a university degree has become one of the best predictors of how people will vote, along with the rural-urban split. And this in part explains why social democratic parties, as they have become more attuned to the values and interests and outlook of the professional classes, of the well-credentialed classes, why they have alienated working people, and why working people have tended to embrace, many of them have tended to embrace right-wing authoritarian versions of populism. And we see this in the United States, we saw it in Brexit, and we see it in the European countries that you well described. So with Professor Hinch, we were debating the philosophy of meritocracy and equality of opportunity. And the dimension that you have added, which I think is equally important and runs parallel to the philosophical debate, is rethinking the dignity of work, rethinking the credentialist prejudice that leads elites to look down, and asks the fundamentally political question, how can we reconfigure the economy to embody in its institutional arrangements and into the version of capitalism we affirm conceptions of respect and of dignity that need to be more than merely rhetorical, that need to be embodied in a new political project. So thank you for that, Mr. Schultz.
And you've raised quite a few topics already that we'll probably come back to, but I would first like to bring Dr. Juliane Kronen into the discussion, who's giving you a third perspective, because she's from the America House, representing the America House NRW. And I would like to know from your perspective what Professor Sandel puts down in his book, The Tyranny of Merit. Is that to you an American story, or what also applies to Germany? We've had a few parallels already, but I'm sure you have a lot more.
Yeah, that was exactly my thinking when I went through the book. I mean, whatever is written on the United States, we tend to take this and say they're actually advanced, and that is going to roll over us a little later. We had the discussion, by the way, around the Black Lives Matter discussion. Do we have the same issue? Is it different? Is it a rather national topic? So I read the book and I thought, how much of that really resonates with me, or is it somewhat different? And I have to say, the secular response to a very Calvinist, a very Protestant ethic, this being selected, being, economic success shows that you're chosen and you deserve it. I know that you dissect it in your book, but I thought, is that really how most people look on what they achieve? And I must say it's somewhat buffered. I mean, I grew up in a way, I'm aware it's a lot of luck. You call it either the genetic lottery or the grace of God. But if you have some talents, it's also an obligation to use them, and use them also for the wider good, use them for society. That's the way I've been brought up. It's part of Catholic social teaching. And a lot of people I know, I've been at BCG 8 years as a partner, 16 years at a competitive consulting company with a lot of people with excellent education, making a lot of money. And actually that was the more widely held belief that it's a combination of course, your effort, if you have the talents and you get access, but it's also luck, it's people who help you. Why would people otherwise be so interested in finding good mentors who challenge and develop them? If you think it's your own dessert, you don't need anybody else to help you with that. So I think it's more, and actually, although there are some people who think that tax saving is a hobby, have no idea about how can it be that somebody is at the lower part of the population. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. The larger part actually says, I'm in a country where I'm happy to pay taxes because I know that we have to take care of others. And that is actually in the last part of your book where you say we have to put a decent price so people can live from their wages. And the other thing is, if you make a lot of money, it's clear that you pay something. We might have differences on marginal issues, like do we need substance taxation, yes or no, but that's, I think those are small differences. But in general, to say I have an obligation towards society, as an entrepreneur, as a top manager, as whatever, somebody being in academia making a decent salary, I think that is more widely spread than usually reported. So I have to disagree a little bit that everybody, looks down, and I don't think that's the majority. The other thing is, I've learned in organizational psychology, there is something called, a concept called the locus of control by David McClelland, who says, in general, you can distinct people who have an understanding that they can shape their destiny, they can make their choices, and other people think they have an external locus of control, which means they are basically the victims of what's happening to them. They don't feel that they have this degree of being able to create and design and put things in their own hand. But this is not a matter of attitude. This is a psychological lottery. It's something you simply don't, you can reflect on that and try to be a little bit more courageous, but that is something we have to understand, that not everybody is in the situation of saying, I take things forward. The other thing I would like to, maybe as a message of hope, when we talk about capitalism, what is it that people are working for? We have fortunately a rise of social enterprises. Within the European Parliament, there's a large section working on the social economy, Europe. People who start companies with a purpose to contribute to usually a sustainable development goal. I mean, my social business does two things: social participation and avoiding disposal, or avoiding by distributing brand new consumer goods which otherwise would be disposed of, but we collect them and distribute them to over 5,000 charities in Germany. Why should they spend money on things they can basically get for free or for a small handling fee? Plus, we reduce the waste. And there are a lot of social enterprise ideas coming up. The unfortunate thing is in this country that it's very hard to get funding for them. But now, during the election campaign, parties put it up in their programs. The Social Democrat Party has quite a bit on there, the Green Party has quite a bit in there, that we actually need those people who work definitely towards goals in society, making a contribution to goals in society. There's, by the way, a very interesting proposal. There are a lot of dormant assets in Germany, something like 11 billion in bank accounts where there are no heirs, nobody has, nobody knows who owns this bank account. The idea is to take this money to provide loans, and should a righteous owner come back, entitled owner come back, I mean, you can always reimburse them. That's a good idea of mobilizing assets for social progress. So again, I don't think we have it in that rigidity. It's much more buffered. One point, the last point, I found very interesting, your analysis about the helicopter parents who put so much stress on their kids that although they are technically admitted to the most competitive colleges, have a lot of psychological issues. And I think we are at the beginning of the curve here in Germany when it comes to helicoptering. I think that is a lesson we should take very, very seriously and let the kids enjoy their childhood. I think there is something we can learn from that and maybe avoid. So that's the very first rundown on how much does it resonate and how much would I see here from your thoughts.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Cronin. You mentioned the earlier precedent for debates about meritocracy when you said that today's meritocracy is a secularized version of a debate that went on among Christian theologians, which was not a debate about whether the wealthy deserved the money they made. It was a debate about whether salvation is something that we earn as a result of our own merits, the way we live, our degree of observance, our faithfulness to God, or whether salvation is purely a gift of God's grace, unrelated to merit or earning or deserving. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's a fascinating prehistory to the debate that we have today, the secularized version of that debate, where we argue not about whether salvation is earned and deserved or a matter of grace and luck, but we debate whether income and wealth, power and honor and prestige are earned and therefore deserved by those who attain them. And it's certainly true that Catholic social teaching today emphasizes, and not only Catholic social teaching, emphasizes the obligations that the successful have to the wider society. This rejects the idea that our success is our own doing. It rejects the idea that we are self-made and self-sufficient, and that therefore we deserve the full measure of the benefits the market heaps upon us. And what you mentioned in the second part of your commentary, Dr. Cronin, had to do with social enterprise versions of capitalism, which brings to mind the fact that during these decades, the last few decades, there has been a tendency to assume that the only purpose of capitalism is to maximize shareholder value. Milton Friedman was one of the people who made this view prominent. And this attitude toward capitalism shaped much actual practice of American capitalism, especially in the United States, and to some extent in Britain, perhaps less so in Germany in recent decades. But I think now, and this is in line with your message of hope, Dr. Cronin, I think now there is a growing awareness that the purpose of capitalism is not only to maximize shareholder value, it's also to serve the welfare and the needs and in the common good of employees, of customers, of consumers, of suppliers, of the community, and also of the planet. Which goes back to a point raised by Mr. Schultz earlier. In the 1990s, in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War, the market triumphalist faith wrongly assumed that capitalism is just one thing, and it had won. But the remarks of Dr. Cronin emphasized that capitalism can be interpreted and implemented in ways that are not simply driven by a certain narrow vision of finance and of shareholder value, but by a wider range of social purposes. And this broader understanding of capitalism can bring it into closer connection to a politics of the common good. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
You cannot see what's happening here right now and why we chuckled. But there was a comment actually coming up from Nina Tichmann, who's following us somewhere online and said, I wish that Martin Schulz became Bundeskanzler, Chancellor of Germany. And he just asked me to take a picture of that, so that's why we... but that brings us back to the political field. Perfect. which brings us back to the political field, because we're at a crossroads, and you've mentioned it in your remarks already, and you all tapped into it, talking about the corona crisis, talking about establishing a new government. And it is a moment in time right now, while we're sitting here, where dozens of politicians in Berlin are probably dressing up to actually sit down and talk about how do we get this together, how do we form a new government, how do we probably put some ideas that we are debating here into reality. And Olaf Scholz, on the evening of the election, said we have to organize respect in society. And before I ask Martin Schulz how we're doing that, I would like to encourage the audience that we have two people with microphones. Probably they can wave the microphones to you. If you have questions, please feel free. Throw them in. I'm sure he would like to hear more about you liking him as a chancellor, but probably some questions that we also have here in the audience. But I would first hand the question on to you. Is this a tipping point, a moment in time, or is it just going to pass by?
No, it's a key question of the future of our society. But your question was rightly in a justified moment, when the 12 dozens of politicians sit together now. I hope that they will understand that you cannot pass a law from today we have respect. So that will not function. What we need is that respect grows once more up in the society, in the daily relationship between people, in the daily action. And here the elites, therefore I get back to this term, elites. Here the elites have a key role. And therefore we have to define who are the elites. Who are the elites? Are you and are we here?
Go ahead with the definition.
You? The elites are those who, by their means, they dispose in their daily life, have an high impact of the mood in which their own environment meets them. The messages they give to their own environment. Mr. Drosten, I take an example of a German scientist, famous one, is for sure a member of the elite. The question how he discuss his visions, his proposals, his perceptions, his analysis with his environment is decisive, as we all saw during the last 1.5 years. Karl Lauterbach is for sure an elite, a member of the elite. Are these two people, two famous scientists, one a politician, another one a mediatic star? Is what they are telling to people perceivable, understandable for the ordinary citizens? I think partly yes, part not. In my constituency, when I'm discussing with people, they tell me, ordinary citizens, my voters, could you translate me what Mr. Drosten said, or could you explain what Karl Lauterbach says? I don't understand them. Now you could criticize me by saying, yeah, but this is very scientific. To explain the spread of a virus in an exponential way, already the three terms, virus, pandemic, exponential, is for a lot of people strange. I have no solution without one. The other ones, the politicians, the journalists, you and I, we have to translate it so that people can understand it. I cannot demand a scientist to speak like a people in the pub. This is impossible. But people in the pub have the right to know about what are they speaking. And this is now an extreme example. But in the pandemic, everybody depended to understand what is going on. We had here really a problem to translate scientific terms into practical terms for practical life, which happened not sufficiently in my eyes. A failure of the elite, not of the ordinary citizens. And then you can go to the pub and tell me, yeah, if you don't understand, I can't help you. Then what Mr. Sandel just said happens. They are looking down on me. We must try to find a way, I repeat it, I said it already in my first intervention, how the elites, the actors, Messi, the football players, 1. FC Köln, the biggest, by the way, biggest society in Cologne, 130,000 members. 1. FC Köln is one of the most important institutions in Cologne. By the way, a compliment to FC, which was quite, no, not only for yesterday's victory, but or the day before yesterday. No, the FC contributed a lot with his vaccination center in front of the stadium to convince people to accept the vaccination. I found this from a football club a very courageous step, and this is a simple contribution how trust could be regained. Actors, football players, whoever must, I come to an end, Jochen, must try to find a way, and especially politicians, to regain trust, because the gap is, in my eyes, also this enormous loss of trust, because citizens feel disconnected from what the so-called elites are discussing and how they are living.
And we have questions in the audience.
Die würden wir jetzt mal, Benjamin und ich, im Wechsel mit reinnehmen.
And could you introduce yourself? That would be very kind, because Professor Sandel will not be able to see you, so it would be kind if you could just introduce yourself and then go ahead with
Also
your
vielleicht
question.
kurz immer den Namen sagen und dann einfach die Frage hinterher und Frau Butler übersetzt. Ich halte fest.
Ja, Walter Schulz. Martin hat mir sicherlich gern das Wort gegeben. Ich entschuldige mich auch, dass ich niemandem mein Englisch zumute.
Alles gut.
Wir haben sehr viel jetzt über die Würde der Arbeit gesprochen. Und ich glaube, der nächste Schritt sollte sein, dass wir auch über den Wert der Arbeit sprechen. Ich zitiere da den Präsidenten des Deutschen Handwerks, Herrn Wollseifer, so heißt er. Der hat neulich sehr darauf hingewiesen, dass wir, wenn jetzt die ökologischen Veränderungen angehen, wir viel Geld ausgeben können, wir auch viel erklären können, dass wir aber ohne die Handwerker, die aufs Dach klettern oder die unten Gas legen, keinen Schritt weiterkommen, dass wir alle Ziele verfehlen werden. Ich glaube, das ist eine große Chance, dass wir jetzt klar machen, wir sind nicht nur im Denken an der Zeitenwende, sondern auch in den materiellen Bedürfnissen an der Zeitenwende. Und da könnten wir den Wert der Arbeit völlig neu bestimmen.
Danke.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Schulz, they are brothers in names.
No, he is my brother.
There you go.
It's my elder brother, yeah.
See, now we get into family affairs. More Schulzes out there. Probably the whole audience.
It's always the same.
He said that we talked a lot about the dignity of work, but what he wants to bring into the discussion is the question of value of work. What value do we actually look at when we talk about certain jobs? And he pointed to the craftsman, without whom we wouldn't be able to do anything as a society. Like your example, Martin Luther King, and his speech years back, that kind of like pointed to this as well, that there is a value to work of craftsmen which we underestimate, and that this might be a tipping point to really go to it and talk about the value of work and not only the dignity of work.
I think that we need to discuss the two together. I agree with what Mr. Schulz in the audience has raised. To speak about, to make the dignity of work a part of a political project requires a public discourse that is more demanding than the kind to which we've become accustomed, and that addresses questions of value more directly. One of the reasons we often assume that the money people make is the measure of their contribution to the common good. One of the reasons we assume that is that we have left markets to decide the question of the value of work, the value of a contribution. Now, markets get it wrong, but one of the reasons we have outsourced our moral judgment about the value of this or that job to markets is that it seems to spare us as democratic citizens the need to debate controversial questions of values, including what contributions to the common good matter most. What I'm arguing for is that if we want a politics that affirms the dignity of work, we have to reclaim from markets the right to decide what counts as a valuable contribution. We need to reclaim it as democratic citizens and to be prepared to reason together about what contributions to the common good and to the economy are truly important. These are questions of values that we tend to put to one side in our public discourse for fear of disagreement. But I think, and this is perhaps paradoxical, I think part of the solution to the polarized politics and culture we have today is to engage more directly in our public discourse with competing conceptions of value. We need a morally more robust kind of public discourse, I think, than the kind to which we've become accustomed, because this would be a way of welcoming to the public sphere conceptions of value, conceptions of the good life that people care about, and that we should not leave these questions to be decided only by markets, as if markets were value neutral ways of deciding controversial questions of value. We as democratic citizens need to reclaim those questions and to debate them and to discuss them within our public discourse.
Well, there is a reclaiming from the audience as well. We have another question here.
Another question, I don't know if related to Mr. Schulz as well.
Not really, I apologize. Professor Sandel, thank you so much for your lecture, or whatever you want to call it. I want to get back to what you said about the Nordic countries, because I found it very fascinating that they're so much faster in allowing people to reach different stages of society, or whatever you want to call it. So what I'm asking is, in those societies, can you see that part of what you're proposing has been implemented? So are they kind of a case study of, okay, if we try to get away from the concept of meritocracy that we have right now, we will get to a more, to a society where it's easier to rise up in a way? Or would you say that they have different, because in my view, they've always been pretty meritocratic societies. So I'm just asking whether, can you see a link there, or do you think it's something different?
I think there are two separate questions here, and thank you for this really important observation and question. One issue is how countries achieve high levels of intergenerational mobility, as the Nordic countries have done. And I think this has to do with strong welfare states and greater degrees of equality, especially in the domains of health and education, but also income security. We in America, for years, told ourselves a certain comforting myth. Yes, America may be more unequal than European societies, but we don't need to worry so much about inequality, because in America, it's always possible to rise. No one is consigned to the class of his or her birth. For us, mobility can be an alternative to equality. The problem with that comforting story is that America is not a more mobile society than many European countries, including the Nordic countries. There is greater intergenerational mobility in Denmark and Norway and Sweden and Canada than there is in the United States. I sometimes say the American dream is alive and well and living in Copenhagen. But I think today, inequality is a necessary, equality, especially in health and education and welfare and income security. Equality is a condition for high levels of intergenerational mobility. I think the issue of meritocracy is somewhat different. The issue of meritocracy has to do with attitudes toward success and the tendency of the successful and the well-credentialed members of society to believe that they have earned their place. Now, these attitudes can be corrosive of the welfare state. They can be corrosive of the solidarity that leads to public provision for everyone of health and education and income security. But a society that seeks to move beyond a single-minded focus on meritocratic competition would not measure itself only by individual upward mobility. It would also aspire to create decent and dignified conditions of life and of work and of community for everyone, regardless of whether or not they were able to go to university and rise. Rising would not be the only thing that mattered. Making life better and work more dignified for everyone, rural or urban, university educated or not, that would be the broader aspiration that I've described as a new politics of the common good.
And we have another question from the audience.
Yes, my name is Tim Lücke. Thank you very much for the great talk, Professor Sandel. My wife, who's running around doing exceptional photos, and we founded a company called Transatlantica, and our goal is to address the crisis of the West, by which we understand populism and increasing polarization. We just came back from another event at Leipzig with the German American Institute for Saxony, and we had a professor, John C. Austin from the University of Michigan. He's a Brookings Fellow, and he's working on trying to provide better opportunities for people in rural areas in Michigan and across the Midwest. And so he presented his ideas, and everything was very convincing. I was like, those are great initiatives. So they're getting together with business leaders, politicians, etc. They have great plans, and they're actually executing them. But the question then that I had was, well, your audience seems to be less fortunate, let's call them that for now, poor people in Michigan. How do you actually reach them? And his answer was like, well, they feel disrespected and not recognized. And we came to the conclusion that there was a problem of actually getting to the audience. And if I may pose sort of a critical question here, I wonder whether we have a similar problem here, because your audience is not poor folks in Michigan. Your audience seems to be the elites, and you talked about the center left in the United States, in Europe. And so you're talking about what mistakes, we need to know what are our mistakes, and the mistake seems to be that we sort of have this hubris, and I'm saying we because I went to the University of Chicago, so I'm part of the elite, and the hubris comes from the meritocratic idea that, well, we deserved it. I want to question that, though. We conducted 50 interviews in the United States that are coming out soon in a book, and that's called Why Trump. And when we talk to Trump supporters, the problem they seem to have was not that they thought elites were arrogant because of the argument that you're making. The problem that they were having is that democratic elites especially were calling them fascist, right? So there is a moral hubris there perceived by Trump voters, for example, but also by others, that anybody who votes for Trump is immediately basically a fascist. And we have a similar issue here in the United States, in Germany, sorry. So just to get to the point, finish that up closely, but I would really, when you call everybody who supports Trump a fascist, basically, or call them basket of deplorables, as Hillary Clinton did, then that's not really related to any problem of merit or sort of distribution. But if we want to overcome populism, we need to have a debate, we need to have a dialogue. That's not going to happen when those people feel like they're being treated really unfairly for other reasons.
And I see quite a few reactions here because I see a lot of writing happening on Professor Sandel's end, and I've heard already a comment right next to me from Martin Schulz, so probably both of you want to elaborate on it.
Go ahead. The people on the panel, if they'd like to respond first, please.
So the word's yours, Mr. Schulz.
Yeah, I would give you first and foremost, because I think most of people came for you, not for me. But yeah, I share the view. My experience is a similar one. People in my constituency, western part of Germany, coal mining region, feel humiliated, not respected. And I try to give an example. In front of my house, I'm living since always in my constituency in the same place, and in front of my house is a small park with some banks in the mid, and the coal mining pensioners are gathering there every day. And they have a spokesman, Gülpens Fritz, my brother knows him. And this is a really decent person, but he can't speak nice German. He speaks platt, as we say. I don't know what it is in English. And when we had in Berlin the identity debate between Kevin Kühnert and Wolfgang Thierse, old white man against a young gay leader of the Social Democratic Party. These people asked me the next day, hey Schulz, you are always in Berlin, explain this, what is that identity policy? What's an identity policy? And there was someone who believed, an older one, it has something to do with the passport, with the identity card. He called it biologische Maßnahmen. I said, no, these are biometric measures, has nothing to do with the identity card. Yeah, but what is it? They said, you should respect gays, for example. I said, I respect them. I have nothing against gays. Where is the debate? What's going on? These people even didn't understand from a basic point of view what happened. And then I thought if these people would be in Berlin and behave in Berlin like they behave here and speak in Berlin like they speak to me, they would be taken as fascists. Therefore, my question some rounds before was, we here in the room, we in the theater here, we are the elites. Our biggest challenge is to re-find a frame in which we could get back in a constructive dialogue with a lot of people who don't trust us. And this is very basic, a very basic loss of trust. That people think already in advance, before starting a dialogue, this is one of the elites. I'll tell you another example. Helicopter parents. In Berlin and in my constituency, I make the same experience. I'm speaking to the women and men in the kindergarten. the nurses there. And they tell me always the same story. Ordinary citizens in Neukölln, from a Turkish origin, are coming with the children, they bring the children, they get the children back, they are satisfied and grateful that we care about their children. The so-called elites in Berlin, the winners of the gentrification in the quarter, are coming with the children and asking what games you are playing, how is the food, what are you doing in the morning, where are the paths you walk with the children, are they safe, not, is there enough police, not in this street, please, it's too much drugs, please here. Half of my time I have to care about the parents and not about their children. And when I ask who are this, the answer is the elites. The lack of respect to these people we just discussed, that the lack of respect for the key persons, the key jobs, and this is a key job for our society. Who has this lack of respect for these key people? Are these ordinary citizens, or are these the representatives of the elites? So we must define what is elite and how is the behavior of this elite and what have we to change in the society that this, I call it elite behavior, would be reduced and on equal footing, basing mutual respect behavior would regain more space in our society than this is the case today. And therefore, I hope once more that politicians gathering together in Berlin understand respect must be showed and practiced in the daily life and not discussed in the feuilletons of the newspapers.
So, Professor Sandel, how do we bring people together? What's your idea? How do we pull them back from their bubbles into a common space?
We need to create common spaces of a kind that we don't have, that are not functioning well these days. Part of the problem is that as inequality has grown, there are fewer and fewer class mixing public spaces and common spaces in our everyday lives and within civil society. The media is one potential place where this kind of dialogue take place, but the media is not doing a very good job of having sustained and serious and respectful dialogue across the economic and cultural and educational gaps that we've been discussing. I'd like to mention two quick examples. First to say, it is true that many people who vote for Trump or other authoritarian right-wing populists feel humiliated and disrespected. That was one of the central motivations that I had in writing the book, to try to get those, the so-called winners to understand the source of the resentment and the anger. And I did a television program shortly after Trump was elected, where we brought together for a dialogue a group of Trump supporters and Trump critics. And we filmed for 4 hours and had a conversation about the hardest issues that divided these two groups. And among the Trump supporters, their strongest complaint was that Trump critics call them racists, analogous to the basket of deplorables or to the charge of fascist. But it goes beyond the lack of trust, the sense of humiliation, the resentment, the sense of grievance. Goes beyond a matter of rhetoric and a matter of manners. Oh, we were discussing earlier in this panel the lack of understanding, as it sometimes seems, that ordinary voters have of scientific experts. And we've seen this during the pandemic, where people hesitate to get vaccinated or resist the wearing of masks, even though public health experts and medical experts tell them it's important. Now, one way of interpreting this resistance to experts is to say, well, they simply don't understand. It's a lack of understanding. I don't think that's the main problem. I think it's less a lack of understanding than a lack of trust. Expertise was discredited, and rightly so, over the past 4 decades, when experts who were economists, especially orthodox neoliberal economists, persuaded politicians that the best way to organize the economy was to promote a kind of neoliberal finance-driven version of capitalism. The version we've been discussing that came in with Reagan and Thatcher, that was continued in the 90s by center-left politicians. Much of the argument that this version of neoliberal, globalized, finance-driven capitalism will help everyone, this came from experts. So it's no surprise that during the debate over Brexit, for example, one of the leading proponents of Brexit said, this country has had enough of experts. Now, what's happened when we come to the pandemic is we desperately need to have people trust what public health experts and medical experts tell us about vaccines and about masks. But their expertise has been discredited, I think, by the failed expertise, the so-called expertise of economists who advised politicians to create an economy that lavished all of its rewards on those with a college education and on the professional classes and on Wall Street and investment bankers. So I think we need to recognize that the problem during the pandemic with ordinary voters accepting and believing in medical experts and public health experts is not simply that they don't understand, it's that they don't trust, and that their lack of trust, given the whole experience of the last 4 decades, their lack of trust is understandable and even to some extent justified. Unfortunately, it's the public health experts whom we need, who have been discredited by the general mistrust of expertise due to the actually failed advice and failed assurance given for the past 3 decades by by economists of a certain orthodox kind. And if I could just add one more comment, because I know we're coming near the end of this discussion, of a practical way, a way of putting respect into practice. In Germany and in the United States and in democracies around the world, in the move to the green economy, in the move to go beyond a carbon-based economy, one of the central challenges will be to not only persuade working people in fossil fuel industries or in carbon-based industries that the new green economy will have jobs for everyone, including men. That will not be enough, precisely because of this mistrust of elites and experts handing down advice and economic arrangements. I think it will be very important for those who are thinking about how to enact a green economy and make the transition to engage in dialogue from the start with the participation, the full participation of workers in the carbon economy, and in rural areas, and in manufacturing jobs that depend on gasoline and carbon. I think workers in these industries and in these places need to become full participants in public deliberation about how our societies will make the transition to a green economy, away from fossil fuels. I don't think it will work simply to gather experts in climate change, devising proposals to lessen our dependence on fossil fuels, telling and assuring working people, don't worry, the green economy will find a new job for you. I think it's important from the start, especially at a time when social democrats need to work closely together with Greens. It's important to build public participation within working communities and within unions to design the framework for the transition to the green economy. This is a way of implementing genuine respect through deliberation and participation in one of the most important political challenges that we face.
You've already hinted at the time. There are a lot of questions that I can see here coming up. I have one question that, because we get quite a few questions from the people who watch us online, and I would just, with a request of a very brief definition, want to hand one on to you from Dilara, who said, what do you mean by humility?
Humility means recognizing the role of luck and good fortune that help us on our way. Humility means recognizing that we are not, however much effort we expend to develop our talents, we are not self-made and self-sufficient. Humility means recognizing our indebtedness to those who make our achievements possible. Humility means resisting the temptation for the successful to inhale too deeply of their success, to believe that it was there, that it was our own doing, and to remember the luck, the good fortune, and the indebtedness that make any achievement possible. That's what I mean by humility. And with that humility comes a greater sense of obligation to seek the common good and to care for those less fortunate, less lucky than we are.
I would love to take this. I would love to take this as the springboard for a very last round for everyone here in the panel. Your idea of, well, where did someone get lucky? Where do we get help along the way? Because it is something where we can do what we were just debating the last hour and a half. How do we get it from the book into the streets? We can start it right here and now. I can say personally, for me, it was a professor at the University of Münster who sent me to a small college in Iowa, who shaped my life very much so, and who helped me along the way. Professor Sandel, how about you? Where did you get lucky? Who helped you along the way?
I've been lucky at so many points along the way. Had the luck of growing up in a family that valued education, but that somehow resist the temptation to be heavy-handed helicopter parents, and so allowed me to develop my interests and to pursue them. The educational opportunities that came my way as a result of those fortunate circumstances, and the chance to, thanks to the luck of having good teachers, to fall in love with philosophy, to have the time and the support to read and to study and to write, the luck to get a job that enabled me to teach and to write, and also to try to connect philosophy to the world, to enable philosophy, as I've always wanted to do, to be a subject that didn't only reside in the clouds or in the abstraction of the academy, but that also could contribute, at least in some small way, to the public life we share. So I think I've been lucky at every stage of that journey.
Well, we'll throw it on to Professor Hinch with the request for a brief explanation of where you got lucky.
About the dignity of work and respect, bringing this into the focus again, really works as an effective means against right-wing populism. You know, we need to be careful not to run into the traps of paradoxes of modern society. It's hard to endorse the view that we need equal opportunity for people not to end up as workers in the meatpacking industry, say, without saying it's less valuable to work in the meatpacking industry than in academia or in management or the arts.
I hate
so what, after all, let me say one last word. I'm pretty much in favor of putting Martin Schulz into the position as chancellor, but he should do it together with his brother, because I very much believe it's more, we should focus more on the flow of payments. The academic elites receive much too much rewards than the other people, and the least privileged members of society receive much too little rewards for what they do, and that really matters. And we can have tremendous influence in this, in designing political institutions, whereas as regarding the discourse about dignity of work and respect for work and all this is very good for general education, but it doesn't work as a political practice. It's more a matter of a public relations department of the parties, perhaps.
As we can see, we have a lot more to debate, and this was only the springboard, but where did you get lucky? You still owe me that answer.
Yeah, I was lucky to, actually, after my PhD, which was on very arcane things about Kant's epistemology, I read the Theory of Justice of John Rawls, and I thought, that's great theory. So I first went to Cambridge to do economics in England, and then Bernard Williams recommended me to go to see John Rawls. And I stayed with him for 2 years, and it was a very lucky incident in my life and changed much of my thinking about the world and about society in particular. And that's how I came to see Michael Sandel first, actually.
Dr. Krohn, let's throw that question to you.
Well, I'm not going even to start. I mean, I think there's so many, if you reflect on it, so many points where you're lucky, where you have received gifts, where you were just at the right people have challenged you, cared for you. I don't even start, but let's start with one thing. I mean, to be born in Germany is not a merit. I mean, it could have happened anywhere in the world, but being born in a country where we are free, we can voice our opinions, we can shape them, we can engage, that is something which is a big luck. And I always, when I do research, when I do research for the Right Livelihood Award Foundation, which awards the alternative Nobel Prizes on the ground, going to Eastern Congo, to Chad, whatever, and seeing that you cannot move freely, seeing under which conditions people have to live, I think it's a luck we should be grateful for. That's where a lot of things start, and I'm not going to continue because I think that would take the rest of the day to really think about where we're being gifted and, you know, blessed every single day.
Mr. Schulz.
Yeah. First of all, you can be sure even if I would have become chancellor, he would be behind me. My brother is always. I became grandfather in January, and I was lucky. I thought the trust my daughter and her husband had, that a child born in the middle of the pandemic, in the year 2021, nevertheless, and I agree with you, born here in Germany, has an enormous chance to live a life in peace, wealth, sustainability, and democracy, which is possible in our country. This loss of trust we discussed during the last couple of hours here we could only regain trust if we trust in our own future. And therefore, I was very lucky to see that my daughter has such confidence and trust in the future of her own child. That made me happy.
What better way to end this discussion in a very practical, down-to-earth way. Thank you to the panel for your ideas, for your insights, for your jumping points. And thank you to Professor Sandel, who spent his Sunday afternoon in Spain with us. And before we finally let you go, I have a very practical, technical question from the photographer who would love to have a picture with the three of you and Professor Sandel, who's here virtually. If you could just go next to the screen so she can get like a group picture. While I'm saying thank you so much to the audience, thank you for your questions, thank you for your reactions, because you could see that it was I hope it's okay for the photographer.
Too dark?
Just in front of the screen.
Was soll ich machen?
Vor die, Professor Hinsch, einfach vorne, genau. See, that's the technical backgrounds. And since we're talking about technical backgrounds, I would like to thank the technical staff here, because without them, nothing of this would have been possible. Perfect, thank you so much. So we got that one in as well. Thank you so much for your participation. And with that, thank you to the panel, to Professor Sandel, and we'll hand it back to Mr. Ott.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael Sandel. Thank you very much. Wir bedanken uns ganz herzlich bei allen, die mitgewirkt haben, insbesondere jetzt nochmal bei der Moderatorin Martina Butler. Herzlichen Dank.
Danke.
Wir freuen uns darüber, dass Sie alle hier dabei gewesen sind und auch die vielen, die zugeschaut haben im Stream. Und freuen uns natürlich darüber, wenn das nächstes Jahr hier weitergehen kann. Sie wissen, wir haben jetzt einmal im Jahr am 3.10. eine Verabredung, immer zum Geburtstag von Axel Molinski hier an diesem Ort und werden das dann nächstes Jahr weiter diskutieren. Und jetzt gebe ich erst noch mal weiter an meine beiden Mitveranstalter. Benjamin?
Ja, vielen Dank an alle, vielen Dank an das fantastische Podium. Thank you so much, Professor Sandel. I'll just reiterate because you can't thank enough, and I feel to have your wording very humbled to be able to do this. Thank you so much. Ganz kurz nur, der typische Abbinder, Sie finden uns schon online. Ich erzähle Ihnen jetzt nicht, was wir alles machen, nur ein Shoutout. Es ist so toll. I'm going to continue in English. It's so great to have you all here in presence. There will be another in-person event. October 20th at the Cologne Chamber of Commerce, our annual Otto Wolff lecture with the highest ranking diplomat of the US Embassy currently in Germany, Chargé d'Affaires, Clark Prize on transatlantic security. It's the first visit ever of him in this region, so come join us, you'll find us online. Danke erneut. Ja. Schönen Sonntag.
Winfried.
Ja.
Das ging fix.
I simply join in with expressing my gratitude to everybody, and especially, of course, to Michael Sandel and to the podium for this fabulous discussion. And I hope you have a chance to visit our website on wissenschaftsforum.org. That's the way to do it, I guess. Okay, thank you so much, and have a nice Sunday in Spain and everywhere else.
And damit sind wir jetzt am Ende angekommen. Ich will nochmal deutlich sagen, ich finde, es ist wichtig, dass Abgeordnete, auch amtierende Abgeordnete, anfangen, wieder in der Bevölkerung darüber zu diskutieren, wohin unsere Gesellschaft geht. Das soll ein Beitrag dazu sein. Deshalb bin ich ganz dankbar für all die das möglich gemacht haben. Ich wünsche euch allen einen schönen Sonntag. Danke an die Übersetzer, danke an die Technik, danke ans Haus. Alles Gute, bis demnächst. Goodbye, Mrs. Sandel. Thank you very much. Nochmal aufstehen. Sehr gut.